Tonight, we're considering two measures. The first is a resolution to condemn the collective delusion known as QAnon. Look, we are not talking about some political ideology here. QAnon is a sick cult, plain and simple. Its supporters gather in the darkest corners of the internet to spread hate and conspiracy theories that lead to violence. I don't care your political party or who you vote for. This is an extremist ideology, one that traffics in political violence, not political discussion. We have a bipartisan measure before us to repudiate this, and I hope that we can come together and do it as one Congress. Second is a resolution condemning forced medical procedures on detained immigrants. Many of us have been horrified to read about what's been happening at some detention centers in Georgia. Immigrants have been forced to endure horrific procedures like hysterectomies performed on them without their consent. That's reminiscent of a dark time in our nation's history when medical abuse against the poor and people of color happened again and again. We must stand up today to defend our values and condemn this abuse. Before we hear from our witnesses, let me turn to our ranking member, Mr. Cole, for any remarks he wishes to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the Rules Committee spent 5 hours and 25 minutes in recess, subject to call the chair today, waiting to report the rule on the Heroes 2.0 bill. I'm at a loss, and perhaps I'd ask you, but can anyone explain to me what happened since we reported that rule? We're now going to make two non-binding resolutions emergencies. I mean, I'm just astonished at this. Let me say for the record, Mr. Chairman, I have no problem with what you said at all in terms of QAnon. I look forward to voting on that resolution. I suspect we'll vote the same way. A little bit mystified why this is coming up now, but no concerns there. I had not read, to be honest with you, I had not read either resolution before you announced the emergency hearing. So again, I look forward to the testimony. I welcome that. At a glance to me, HRes 1153 seems to be a classic move of acting first and asking questions later. I'd like to insert for the record a statement from Dr. Riviera, the IHSC medical director, and a statement from the senior official performing the duties of Director Tony Palm. And let me just quickly, Mr. Chairman, let you know what that's about. The statement from Mr. Riviera, acknowledges or states the accusations will be fully investigated by an independent office, and that says that detainees are afforded informed consent and a medical procedure like hysterectomy, would never be performed against a detainee's will. But I welcome a hearing on that, discussion on that. I think that's something we need to make sure never, ever happens. I'm just wondering why we're not doing that at a committee setting first. And the second statement is from the senior official performing the duties of director, that's Tony Palm, as I mentioned. And it just says, ICE welcomes the effort of both the Office of the Inspector General as well as the Department of Homeland Security's parallel review. So I think we're in agreement that any charges like this need to be fully investigated. We're a little bit, we're sort of taken by surprise to have this at this late point. So that's my major concern. But again, no objections to QAnon. The other one, we are wondering why we don't proceed under a normal investigation, since it appears as if those investigations are also occurring in an appropriate manner within the executive branch. But there's certainly nothing that we would object to in terms of Congress taking a look as well. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses to provide testimony on HR 1153, the condemning unwanted unnecessary medical procedures on individuals without their full informed consent, and HRes 1154, the condemning QAnon and rejecting the conspiracy theories it promotes. Representative Jayapal and Ranking Member Jordan and Mr. Scott, we're delighted that you are here. Without objection, any written materials you submit to rules documents at mail.house.gov before the conclusion of this hearing will be entered into the record. I now recognize the gentleman from Washington, Representative Jayapal.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for hearing my testimony. I want to thank Ranking Member Cole and members of the House Committee on Rules. I am pleased to testify in support of both HRES 1154 and 1153. HRES 1154 from Representative Malinowski is a bipartisan resolution. It is co-sponsored by Representative Riggleman, Brian Fitzpatrick, Adam Kinzinger, Josh Gottheimer, and Elaine Luria. And it is specifically about QAnon. QAnon is a movement promoting a collection of unfounded conspiracy theories that have spread on the internet over the last several years. These conspiracy theories undermine public trust in our democratic institutions and our election process. QAnon initially alleged that prominent Americans are engaged in a secret plot to control the world while using their power to exploit children, and now extends to a range of dangerous conspiracy theories. The FBI has assessed with high confidence that, quote, fringe political conspiracy theories, including QAnon, very likely motivate some domestic extremists wholly or in part to engage in criminal or violent activity, and that these conspiracy theories, again, this is a quote, very likely encourage the targeting of specific people, places, and organizations, thereby increasing the likelihood of violence against these targets. I did want to note for members, and some of you may know this, the resolution's lead sponsor, Representative Malinowski, has recently faced threats from QAnon supporters after he was falsely accused of lobbying to protect sexual predators. According to the Combating Terrorism Center at the West Point Military Academy, and this is again a quote, QAnon is arguably no longer simply a fringe conspiracy theory, but an ideology that has demonstrated its capacity to radicalize to violence individuals at an alarming speed. Fortunately, a growing number of political leaders recognize the threat that QAnon poses. This includes Republican House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who recently said that there is no place for QAnon in the Republican Party. The Malinowski-Riggleman resolution does several things. It condemns QAnon and rejects the conspiracy theories it promotes. It encourages the FBI and all federal law enforcement agencies to continue to strengthen their focus on preventing violence, threats, harassment, and other criminal activity by extremists motivated by fringe political conspiracy theories. And finally, it urges all Americans, regardless of our beliefs or partisan affiliation, to seek information from authoritative sources and to engage in political debate from a common factual foundation. I would hope that these are principles that we could all agree with on a bipartisan basis, and I hope for bipartisan support of this resolution. Now I'd like to say a few words about HRES 1153. This is a resolution condemning unwanted, unnecessary medical procedures performed on individuals without their full informed consent. I'm very proud that this resolution enjoys the support of 224 members of the Democratic Caucus, and it comes in response to urgent and disturbing reports from the Irwin County Detention Center in Ocilla, Georgia. On September 14th, a coalition of organizations filed a complaint about the facility, including concerns from whistleblower nurse Dawn Wooten and currently and formerly detained immigrants about women receiving hysterectomies without their informed consent. Since then, a growing number of women have come forward to share their experiences about medical treatment at Irwin. In particular, women who experienced gynecological treatment, including full or partial hysterectomies and other surgeries involving their reproductive organs. In fact, the New York Times just published an in-depth investigative piece detailing their findings after speaking to 16 women who were concerned about the gynecological care they received, including 7 who were able to obtain their medical records. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the records that New York Times story entitled "Immigrants Say They Were Pressured into Unneeded Surgeries."
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, independent gynecologists have begun reviewing available medical records and have raised serious questions about whether patients detained at the Irwin County Detention Center provided informed consent and whether the procedures that were performed on their bodies were medically necessary. These reports indicate that many of these procedures were either unnecessary and or performed without the knowledge or consent of the individual. This is especially alarming given that many of the procedures can result in sterilization or lead to serious continuing reproductive consequences. Medical experts, including these outside gynecologists, have reviewed available medical records and expressed serious concerns that the doctor providing services for Irwin violated prevailing standards of care and the requirement to obtain informed consent from his patients. This past weekend, I traveled to Ocilla, Georgia, with 10 of my colleagues from the House Judiciary Committee and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. We visited the Irwin County Detention Center and spoke with these incredibly brave immigrant women. Mr. Chairman, the stories from these women followed a deeply concerning and similar pattern. Referral to the doctor, often without any sort of gynecological complaint. The doctor then tells women that they have cysts that are problematic and could signify cancer. The doctor gives women shots to treat them, which we have now learned from the medical records are Depo-Provera, a form of birth control that can cause other problems like bleeding. Since women are not told about the typical side effects of the shot, they then return to the doctor concerned about their new symptoms and are then recommended for surgery. The very worst cases that we have heard are women waking up, being put under an anesthetic, and then waking up to find out that one of their fallopian tubes had been removed, or in one particularly egregious case, that the doctor had done a total abdominal hysterectomy. This is about partial and full sterilizations, and it is about unnecessary invasive reproductive procedures being done to women without their consent. This is important. Throughout the whole process, there has been a complete lack of informed consent through the women that we have spoken to and the investigative report that the New York Times did. Women are sometimes forced to submit to surgery, and let's be clear, even if a procedure or a test is medically necessary, a doctor must have consent from their patient. Many of the women that we directly spoke with this weekend also told us of extremely rough, invasive treatment. Women reported that the doctor would insert tools or his own hands into their vaginas without consent and without lubrication. One woman said that she felt like she had been violently sexually assaulted and was in pain and bleeding for weeks after her visit to the doctor. What has emerged from our investigations over the past 2 weeks is this. Number one, women are receiving unnecessary, unwanted gynecological procedures. Number two, there is a total lack of knowledge or consent, or women are being forced to consent. And number three, this is all happening in a broken detention system that lacks accountability and oversight, and a system that unnecessarily detains people when we have better, safer, and more humane tools like alternatives to detention. Let me be very clear. This is not new for women in our country. The experiences we have heard from currently and formerly detained women at the Irwin County Detention Center are part and parcel of a sad and tragic history of medical abuse of Black, Indigenous, people of color, immigrant, poor people, and persons with disabilities who were subjected to procedures without their informed consent. For incarcerated people, this is too recent history, as nearly 150 incarcerated women in California prisons were sterilized between 2006 and 2010. This is an urgent situation. It is a history that must never be repeated, and it is why we urge this committee on a bipartisan basis to approve this resolution condemning medical practices at the Irwin County Detention Center. These women deserve our immediate attention. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ranking Member, let me start with HRES 1154. The extremism, racial prejudice, and religious prejudice are wrong. The House doesn't need to pass a resolution to affirm that fact. Democrats should be focused on addressing pressing national issues. For months, there's been violence in our street. Innocent bystanders and law enforcement officers have been attacked, public and private property destroyed But instead of addressing that violence, instead of condemning that violence, Democrats are focused on this resolution. In fact, just 2 months ago in the Judiciary Committee, when we had the Attorney General there, he posed that question to the Democrats in the committee. Why won't you speak out against the violence? Why won't you condemn the mob? He got silence from the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee. Instead of acting to address the rising threat that China poses to our economy and our national security, Democrats are focusing on this resolution. Just today, House Republicans released a 141-page report on the rising threat that China poses to our economy and to our national security. This report is the result of a months-long effort, makes 82 key findings, and offers over 400 recommendations for how we can address this growing concern. If Democrats were serious about working for the American people, the House would be taking up these recommendations. Instead, we are here today focused on this resolution. Look, I think this resolution is going to pass. I think everyone will vote for it. But it seems to me we got more pressing issues than an organization or some entity that, frankly, most of us have never heard about, don't know what the first thing they do. Regarding HRES 1153, I'll leave most of that to my friend and colleague from Georgia, who's the ICE facilities in their district. But this strikes me as, look, if this happened, what Ms. Jayapal described, obviously that is terrible, that is wrong. We need a full investigation. We need hearings, as the ranking member indicated earlier, Mr. Chairman, and we should have all that. But what this also appears to me is the majority, we know, doesn't like the enforcement of immigration laws. The majority doesn't like ICE's mission, and it has been out to attack ICE, well, frankly, this entire Congress. So I have real concerns about this resolution, as I know my good colleague and friend from Georgia does as well. So I will leave the bulk of our testimony to Mr. Scott from the great state of Georgia. And with that, I would yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Let me now yield to Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to also insert into the record.
Without objection. I can't hear you, Mr. Scott. Oh, yeah.
So the staff attorney at the Advocacy Group Project South told the Washington Post that she included the hysterectomy allegations because she wanted to trigger an investigation, determine if they were true. She had never spoken to any women who had had hysterectomies. Dr. Amin, who, by the way, is an immigrant and an extremely well-respected physician in Irwin County, said that he has only performed 1 or 2 hysterectomies in the past 3 years. Dr. Amin and the Irwin County Hospital and I as well look forward to a complete and thorough investigation of the allegations that have been made. I want you to know this, Mr. Chairman. The procedures are not done at the Irwin County Detention Center. They are not done at the Irwin County Detention Center. They are done at the Irwin County Hospital. And the accusations that they are unwanted and unnecessary and outside of the standard of care are accusations of malpractice. And yet all of these attorneys, that represent all of these accusations, none of them have filed a malpractice suit. And I think that that's very telling that you have made accusations of a physician and of a whole hospital community of mass hysterectomies, mass sterilization, and yet not one single malpractice suit has been paid. I understand from a political standpoint what this is about. This is about not liking immigration detention facilities and people wanting people who are illegally in the country to be allowed to go free. Again, Dr. Amin is an immigrant, and the consequences of the accusations against him are real. And the staff at the Irwin County Hospital, those accusations are real. And the consequences for the people at the Irwin County Hospital and Dr. Amin are very, very serious. And we want the complete and thorough investigation. And we also want those who have made these false allegations to be held liable for the damages that they've done, both to the Irwin County Hospital and to the people who staff the Irwin County Hospital. So I'm sorry that Ms. Jayapal and the others did not see fit to invite me to join them on this past weekend when they were in my district. You're certainly welcome to come to the district anytime. I hope you'll find it in your heart to support our ag producers as well when you're there. But the procedures are not done at the Irwin County Detention Facility. The procedures are done at the Irwin County Hospital, and the accusations against the hospital and the staff at that hospital and Dr. Amin are absolutely false.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'm a little bit lost because this has come on us quite suddenly and without much notification. And sometimes you'll have to explain to me exactly how that happened, or I would appreciate it if you would explain to me. You certainly don't have to explain anything to me, but the QAnon resolution, I have zero problems with. Again, we would have worked with you, I think, on that had we known more. But again, we have no objection. But the allegations that Mr. Scott spoke to, I want to first agree that if they're true, they're outrageous. I think we all agree on that. The ranking member Jordan made that point. Mr. Scott made that point. Look, we need to have an investigation here. Forgive me, and I cast no aspersion, but I don't know anything about a New York Times investigation. With all due respect to the gentlelady, Ms. Jayapal, again, I would much prefer a normal committee, go through a normal committee process, bring in witnesses, give everybody a chance to put every allegation on the table, and everybody who has been accused of anything an opportunity to respond before we rush into this. So again, if what is alleged is true, it's an appropriate action. I just don't think we know that yet. And I think it's very premature to put something like that in front of the House. So I don't have any questions. I think both all three of our witnesses, made their cases quite well. But this is one where, again, we understand there is an appropriate investigation going on within the executive branch. If Congress feels the need to do one as well, I have zero objection to that. These are very serious allegations. But I would certainly hate to put something on the floor that turned out later not to be true, that we don't really know. And again, I'm not casting aspersions on anybody. I just have not had any chance. I don't think any member of this committee has had much chance to digest this. And certainly our members, I think, if we're going to ask them to vote on something like this, would feel a lot more comfortable if there were a full committee investigation where witnesses on both sides, people that had concerns and complaints came. And so I would just invite us to do that before we proceed on the resolution relating to the alleged, misuse of hysterectomies. I just don't know. And so I'm uncomfortable casting a judgment in that area. But obviously respect you, Mr. Chairman, and we'll proceed. But again, we would appreciate on our side a little more notification as to what we're doing, why we're doing it, and certainly and charges that involve the reputations of individuals or institutions. We want to give them the opportunity to respond and clear themselves if those things are untrue, or give the accusers the opportunity to make their case in a definitive way so there's no doubt. I just think we've missed that opportunity in this case and by rushing that particular resolution to the floor. So that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as a member of the Women's Democratic Caucus, I am very grateful that we are bringing these two resolutions to our committee today. It was shocking to hear the allegations that women in detention centers received hysterectomies without their consent. Can you imagine going to your doctor's office and being forced to undergo a medical procedure that you don't want and don't need? That is exactly what happened to at least 4 women who have come forward and said that they did not approve of the medical procedures that they received. This country has had a bad history of forced sterilization of people of color, poor people, immigrants, and specifically targeting women that are in the prison system. At this point, this history is not that far behind us. Between 2006 and 2010, nearly 150 women in prisons in my home state of California were sterilized. California moved forward with a complete audit, asking what taxpayer dollars were spent, how much, who was involved, and who ordered them. Because we know that this is not okay. Everyone should be able to control their bodies, to be able to choose for themselves when they want to have a baby, not be forced to have a baby and not be forced to not be able to have a baby. And certainly men do not have a say-so in that. This resolution calls on Department of Homeland Security to comply with all investigations and hold all individuals involved accountable. Hold them accountable. Now, I think that that is the bare minimum that we can do. I think that we will need to do more as it relates to what investigations come forward and how many more people have been involved. I look forward to working with my colleagues in this committee into exploring how much more we can do to ensure that women in the prison system, whether they are immigrants or not, are protected. Now, on the issue of Resolution 1154, condemning QAnon and rejecting the conspiracy theories it promotes, it's extremely offensive to many members on this committee, probably all members on this committee, that have worked to protect children from sexual predators, either now or in their former roles as local representatives. And I put myself in one of those categories. These are online conspiracy theorists who believe that the world is run by devil-worshiping pedophiles, or that people like Oprah Winfrey or the Dalai Lama, who I very much respect, are killing people and drinking their blood in order to live longer. Unfortunately, these people do not leave their conspiracy theories to themselves or to their inner circles. They're online and they have committed crimes like murder, and they have plotted to kill one of the presidential nominees, Vice President Joe Biden. Today, they spread a rumor that Joe Biden was wearing a wire at the debates. The FBI identifies this group as dangerous, whereas President Trump has called them people who love our country. If the President of the United States will not denounce this insane rhetoric, this cult, us as members of Congress must do. And I want to thank the ranking member for standing up against this cult. I urge my colleagues to support both of these resolutions, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Woodall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have developed a great deal of affection for Ms. Jayapal over the years she's been here, and every time she brings an idea before us, I always find it interesting. And I've got to tell you, Ms. Jayapal, it was painful to listen to the description that you provided in your testimony. I don't believe there is a man or woman in this institution that wouldn't, well, condemn is on the small side of what we ought to do if those accusations are true. Just unimaginable the anxiety, someone struggling with language barriers, struggling with incarceration, being put in that circumstance and waking up. It is abhorrent at every single level. I don't know where we go in the order of events to make sure that we speak out in the strongest levels. If what is being alleged is true, what we're proposing in this resolution doesn't go nearly far enough, not nearly far enough. And if it's happening here, is it happening other places? We've got to speak in a much larger voice. So I do have some concern that in the absence of that understanding, that this is the right concern with the wrong language at the wrong time. But I want to talk about the language a little bit line by line along the lines that my friend Austin Scott talked about. But Mr. Jordan, I wanted to recognize you understand that you have an event that you need to get to. I do not have any questions for you, and I wanted to recognize you if you had any, if you wanted to make a request.
Well, I know the rules of this great committee. If I could indulge the chairman, we just got this into this hearing about an hour ago, and I do have a commitment that I'm already 15 minutes late for. If I can take questions, if there are some from members, or if we can leave early, obviously I know that's not the custom of this committee, and I'll do what the chairman says.
All right, well, the gentleman will yield, Mr. Woodall will yield to me.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I have no questions from Mr. Jordan. I don't know if anybody else on the panel does. So can I just, if anybody has a question for Mr. Jordan, can you indicate to me now that you need him to stay, or can we dismiss him? Last chance. Okay, Mr. Jordan, you can leave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much.
All right, Mr. Woodall, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jayapal, I'm looking at a manager's amendment that Mr. Nadler has filed that seeks to change the resolved portions. I'm sure you've seen it. It changes the language in resolved 4E from hold all individuals involved in these incidents accountable and bring them to justice. And it changes it to hold all individuals found to be involved in any unnecessary or non-consensual medical procedure at the Irwin County Detention Center accountable and bring them to justice. Does that manager's amendment satisfy the concerns that you have?
Thank you, Mr. It does. We talked about that. We just wanted to be clear that we were talking about the Irwin County Detention Center here and calling on the Department of Homeland Security, as you see in the other resolve pieces, to immediately, make sure that we are addressing this as the investigation is continuing. So I think that is the reason it's very important. I did want to say that over 90% of detained people at Irwin have no legal representation at all. They have no resources to file malpractice lawsuits, as my good colleague from Georgia mentioned. The vast majority, in fact, are deported before they can even pursue justice, which is why this resolution is so urgent. And while I do believe that we should reform the detention system, this resolution actually does not say anything about that. This is very specific to this situation with the Irwin County Detention Center. And I want to thank you, Mr. Woodall, for your friendship over the years and also for your comments, because I can tell you that what I listened to had us all in tears. And I would just invite any man to imagine what that would be like, to be put under and wake up and find part of your reproductive organ gone. And so I just want to be clear that that is why we are moving with utmost urgency to make sure that everything that happens in this investigation is actually expedited, that we get the information that we need, and that we pause the removal of any individual who experienced medical procedures so that we can get that testimony before they're deported, and that we allow individuals who have experienced this to have immediate access to adequate, safe, and consensual medical treatment. These women are hurting, and they need the United States Congress in a bipartisan way to stand up for them.
As Mr. Scott described in his testimony, the most egregious descriptions that you provide of the descriptions you provided of the most egregious procedures all happened at the hospital. Does this language, is this intentional that the language says any medical procedure at the Irwin County Detention Center? Because none of the hysterectomies would have occurred at the Irwin County Detention Center, but every flu shot would have occurred at the Irwin County Detention Center, and thus I want to make sure that we're, I think it undermines what I know that you are trying to do, the more that this looks like an immigration reform proposal instead of a we've got really bad actors that we've got to hold accountable proposal. Is this intentional, that instead of saying at the Irwin County Hospital, it says medical procedures at the Irwin County Detention Center?
Thank you for the question. The reason that it says the detention center is because private for-profit detention facilities essentially are contracted by ICE, and then they contract out their medical procedures. In this particular detention facility, reporters have reported that they referred over 1,000 procedures, medical procedures outside the detention center. That is actually quite unusual. Typically, we find that individuals don't get the medical treatment that they need. So this is occurring at the Irwin County Detention Center because it is a contracted service that is contracted for by ICE and by the facility. So that is technically correct language, even though I understand your question, and it is not intended to address any other. We are talking specifically about these allegations that are under investigation here in this resolution.
Mr. Scott talked about the respected facility in his district and the dedicated men and women who work there serving his constituency. There are no doubt, to the credit of our civil servants, men and women who had serious medical concerns or even not serious medical concerns, who were treated while they were at the Irwin County Detention Center and were thrilled with the quality of the care that they received. I'm concerned that by not making any distinction between folks who have a grievance, and I know that we're still in the process of uncovering grievances, but without making any distinction between folks who have a grievance and those who do not, it does look like an immigration reform proposal for the Irwin County detainees, as opposed to getting to the issue that you rightly raised and we absolutely need to get to. I have that same concern about in the resolved clause, the resolve number 2 that says the House of Representatives recognizes that everyone deserves to control their own reproductive choices and make informed choices about their bodies. I know one of the issues you and I do not see eye to eye on is that of life and what I might characterize as fighting on behalf of a young child. You would might describe as, or others might describe as fighting against someone controlling their own reproductive rights. Again, I could not feel more enraged about the charges that you described, that those would happen on your and my watch. But this resolve number 2 goes directly, in my mind, to a completely different issue and one that we're not likely to resolve tonight. Do you read that resolve number 2 differently than I do, or when it was included, did you anticipate it would raise red flags for folks who believe they are defending life as I believe I am?
Well, interestingly, I thought I was writing it in a way that would not raise the red flags. We did not use any words that specifically relate to abortion. We did not put that language in for that specific reason, because what we are talking about is the ability for a woman to make a choice to have a baby. These sterilization procedures and procedures that affect a woman's ability to do that, continued bleeding, abdominal pain, and the removal of fallopian tubes and other reproductive organs, I wanted to describe how important it is that women could make that choice to have a baby, which I'm a proud mother. And I say that with tremendous love for that ability that only women have. And so that is why it does not include the word abortion. It does not include many of the words that I know you and I would be able to have a good disagreement about. We did not put that in this resolution. And I think that's an extremely important point that you have raised. I also wanted to just say that, you raised another point, and now it's gone out of my mind. So let me just yield back. I forgot what it was that you started with, but I think it was about the Irwin County Hospital. And I just wanted to say again, we have not mentioned the hospital The procedures were all conducted by Dr. Amin at the hospital. We are not commenting on the treatment of the hospital. We are commenting on these procedures conducted by this individual doctor, who I might just add has been, I understand that my colleague from Georgia likes Dr. Amin. Maybe he's a very likable man, but he has been named in a civil case. In 2013, the Justice Department named him in a civil case alleging that he and several other doctors had overbilled Medicare and Medicaid by, among other things, performing unnecessary procedures on terminal patients and leaving the emergency room staffed by nurses while billing for diagnoses and treatments as if they have been performed by doctors. The case is settled for $520,000. So this is a doctor, unfortunately, that appears to have a past precedent in this kind of practice. But we understand these are allegations, but they are serious and they are causing damage to these women that will never be recoverable, not by any amount of money. To take away the ability for a woman to have a child or to put her in a position where she has essentially been assaulted on the table by having somebody do something to her that she did not consent to, that should be a bipartisan concern. And I was hoping by leaving out those words that perhaps we would be able to do something that truly was bipartisan, because I know you believe in those same goals.
I thank you for that. And it absolutely is a bipartisan concern. And I'm thinking if we need to send a demand letter to DHS to make sure there's a preservation of all records as this resolution requests, if we need to buttress the investigations of the Inspector General, both at DHS and at ICE, I want to be your partner in that. But the New York Times descriptions, the experiences you all had in your visit, all surround women at the facility. The resolution would suggest that legal proceedings related to immigration cases stop altogether for everyone at the facility. Is there any suggestion that men are experiencing the same, well, what you describe as criminal behavior that the women have described to you?
Not that we have heard. We have heard that this is completely limited to women, which of course is the history of sterilizations in this country.
And Mr. Chairman, I raise these points not to diminish the quality of my colleagues' work, but to say I do believe that her effort is a sincere one to make this a partnership statement to the administration to say Congress is watching and we are speaking with one voice, and these three issues that I've raised, I think limit that. Let me ask my friend from Georgia, Mr. Scott. I don't know the Irwin County Hospital, but I do worry. It does not take but one or two articles, well, it doesn't take but one or two rumors, much less New York Times articles, to severely negatively impact the reputation of a facility. Have folks had a chance to respond to this? Has this been? Have you heard from folks that have already talked to the Inspector General's staff, for example? Is this all being litigated in the media?
So I think that
if you could turn on your microphone, please.
Sorry. Locally, there is a tremendous amount of support for the Irwin County Hospital and Dr. Amin, which I do not know Dr. Amin on a personal basis. I may have met him over the course of time, as my father is a surgeon in a bordering county, but I do not have a personal relationship with him. I do know that locally, the people know that this originated as a whistleblower complaint about COVID-19 and personal protective equipment. This did not originate as a whistleblower complaint about hysterectomies or sterilizations or any of the things that are being accused of right now. So locally, it originated as a whistleblower complaint about PPE and COVID-19 procedures inside the facility. It is now, since members of Congress have taken it on, again, without a complete and full investigation. I support the investigation from the executive branch, and if we want to have a true and thorough congressional investigation, that's fine with me as well. That's our job. But to come out and make accusations, the accusations that have been made of malpractice, I think that is demeaning to our institution as the U.S. House of Representatives. We should get the facts before we make any type of accusation like that. And whether you are legally in this country or whether you are illegally in this country, you're a human being. And when you go to a hospital, there is a standard of care that follows the diagnosis. And whether you are legally or illegally in this country, that standard of care should be the same. If that standard of care has not been followed, then malpractice suits should have been filed. And those ladies, with due respect to the comment that the majority of people in the detention facility don't have attorneys, it's very clear that the ladies that are making the accusation, at least some of them do have attorneys. And yet there have been no malpractice claims filed. And so I, again, whether there were problems in the past or not, that is very different than a malpractice claim of that has been made of unnecessary hysterectomies. So I support a congressional investigation if Congress wants to do it. I support the ICE investigation, but to push forward with this political statement, there are very real consequences for people who, in this country, are innocent until proven guilty. And the idea that the United States Congress is going to condemn them without a complete and thorough investigation is absolutely ridiculous. That's not the way it should be done in America.
I take your I take your concerns to heart, and Ms. Jayapal, I hope that you feel the conviction that I can feel sitting in the same room with Mr. Scott. I would not want to be on the other end of the investigation that he would lead any more than I would want to be on the other end of the investigation that you would lead, because he is every bit as tireless as you are in seeking justice on behalf of his constituents. I don't know what has transpired today that has led these two bills to be before us, and I know that the majority needs to do what the majority needs to do. But I could not be more affected by the story that has been told here tonight, and I would consider it an incredible missed opportunity for us to speak with one voice on behalf of these women, when the representative from the district wants a thorough investigation, when the ranking member wants a thorough investigation, when every member who has spoken is outraged. What a shame it would be if the effort that Ms. Jayapal drafted in the name of having Congress speak out on behalf of these women became half a voice instead of a whole voice, as I know she intended and she deserves. I know you have the ability to help relay that message, Ms. Jayapal. I hope my chairman does too, but I hope you will both take me sincerely in my efforts to partner on this idea, and Mr. Scott's efforts and Mr. Cole's. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Okay, you sure? Okay. Mr. Perlmutter?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, just a statement, actually. I appreciate Mr. Scott's testimony and some of the remarks that Mr. Woodall, the ranking member, about due process and about innocent until proven guilty. And absolutely, those are bedrock principles of our nation. What is being requested in the HR 1153, though, is really making sure that an investigation can take place without people being deported or being stonewalled or the like. And I would say to Mr. Scott, there may be malpractice cases here, but if any of the allegations are true, they're criminal. This is similar to the USA Gymnastics situation in some respects. So I hope that the remarks, and I appreciate Mr. Scott's concern about the damage to reputation, but what's being requested really is investigatory. It is not in effect, a trial and a jury and a conviction. And I would say to my friend, Mr. Woodall, in that it says pause the removal of any individual who experienced any medical procedure. So it is limited. The language is limited. It's investigatory. And I appreciate the testimony of all the witnesses. And
Would my friend tolerate you?
sure.
I confess I don't know enough about our immigration system, and it's a failing, and I should. I might have imagined that anyone who showed up at that facility would have received a check. Perhaps they received vaccinations, perhaps they received prophylactic care of some kind. And I was concerned that making it seem broader, if you skinned your knee and got a Band-Aid, that's not what Ms. Jayapal is trying to achieve here. What she's trying to achieve is that whistleblowers don't get deported before they have a chance to tell their whole story. And that's here. I thank my friend.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. I think that's a legitimate concern that you just raised, but there is at least a limiting factor here. And it may be that everybody has had some kind of a medical procedure. That's what it says, medical procedure. But I do think it's a limiting factor. I do think, to Mr. Scott's concerns, this is investigatory. It is not a trial. And that the concern is to be able to preserve the evidence. And so I think this is a very legitimate resolution. And I do appreciate your worries that people's names are being dragged through the mud, but that's what happens in investigations sometimes. And I appreciate the fact that Ms. Jayapal has really jumped on this to try to end any kinds of activities that would harm these women. And with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burgess. Ms. Lesko?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter that myself and Representative Chris Smith sent to Chad Wolf, the Acting Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, talking about the investigations that they're doing and wanting answers on what's happening with the investigations.
Without objection.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman and members, I'd like to read, it's only 2 pages, of what actually Representative Smith and myself has asked in this letter to Honorable Chad Wolf, the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security. It says, "Dear Secretary Wolf, thank you for ordering an aggressive and comprehensive investigation into allegations that women at the Irwin County Detention Center had hysterectomies performed on them without medical justification and informed consent, and that the number of procedures was unusually high. One woman detained in the facility mentions that she had spoken with 5 different women detained at ICDC between October and December 2019 who had a hysterectomy done. She stated, when I met all these women who had surgeries, I thought this was like an experimental concentration camp. It was like they're experimenting with our bodies. This individual also noted that most women give hysterectomies were seen by a specific gynecologist unnamed in the report, but identified in the media as Dr. Mahindra Amin. Dawn Wooten, a nurse employed by ICDC, expressed similar concerns. While she acknowledged that some women detained at ICDC had severe issues that may require a hysterectomy, Wooten said everybody's uterus cannot be that bad. Wooten recounted the experience of one detainee who was scheduled to have her left ovary removed due to a cyst. Wooten said that the doctor removed the right ovary instead. When the patient returned to have the left ovary removed, she was given a total hysterectomy. Furthermore, Wooten suggested that the hysterectomies performed on some patients were done without informed consent. She told Project South, these immigrant women, I don't think they really totally all the way understand that this is what's going to happen depending on who explains it to them. Almost done. One woman detained at ICDC also reported not having a procedure properly explained to her. A doctor told her she was going to have a cyst drained. The transporting officer told her she was going to have a hysterectomy, and a nurse told her they would be removing tissue in response to heavy bleeding. When the women tried to explain that something isn't right, a procedure isn't for me, she reports that the nurse got angry. However, because the woman tested positive for COVID-19 antibodies, the hospital refused to operate on her and she was transferred back to ICDC. These accounts don't comport with the statement of Dr. Ada Rivera, the medical director of the ICE Health Services Corps, who stated that since 2018, only 2 individuals at Irwin County Detention Center were referred to certified credential medical professionals at gynecological and obstetrical healthcare facilities for hysterectomies. Dr. Rivera also said that detainees are afforded informed consent, and a medical procedure like a hysterectomy would never be performed against a detainee's will. On September 18th, the Associated Press published an article citing the results of its own internal investigation. It stated the AP's review did not find evidence of mass hysterectomies as alleged in a widely shared complaint filed by a nurse at the detention center. AP also noted that one attorney investigating the case had found that Amin has performed surgery or other gynecological treatment on at least 8 women detained at Irwin County Detention Center since 2017, including 1 hysterectomy. The facts concerning these allegations need to be established without delay. We support Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director Tony Pham's statement welcoming the joint investigations of the Office of Inspector General and the parallel review from the Department of Homeland Security mobilized by Acting Deputy Secretary Ken Cuccinelli. It is vital to conduct a thorough investigation in order to learn the truth regarding these allegations and, if true, in whole or in part, determine the appropriate federal response. We ask that the Department of Homeland Security brief us on the findings of this investigation as soon as possible. Signed by Christopher Smith, Member of Congress, and myself, Debbie Lesko, Member of Congress. I'm the Republican co-chair of the Women's Caucus in Congress. And obviously, if these allegations are found to be true, they're outrageous and need to be dealt with. But that's the problem. And that's as I just read in my letter, you had allegations, but then you also had the counter. You also had them saying this wasn't true. Then you had the Associated Press do their own internal investigation, and it says the AP's review did not find evidence of mass hysterectomies as alleged. And so in this resolution, it says, one of the whereases says, whereas these allegations indicate a failure by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to conduct rigorous oversight to protect the health and safety of people in its custody. Now, therefore, and so since when do allegations that aren't proven, that haven't been thoroughly investigated yet, how can we say that they indicate a failure of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement? I mean, they're just allegations. What happened to due process? You know, again, as others have said, if this is true, then obviously it's horrible. But what if it's not true? We're going to put to the floor and the U.S. House of Representatives something that's saying, whereas these allegations indicate a failure by U.S. Immigration and Customs informants. How can allegations do that? What if they're not true? You know, this is dangerous stuff. I don't understand why we're not going to a committee and investigating this, or bringing forward Department of Homeland Security director as secretary and asking about these things. But yet we're going to, with a resolution at 7:45 at night over allegations that we don't even know are true. There's just something wrong with this. You know, and so, you know, in this format, the way that this is now, I just can't support this. Even though the allegations are horrendous, we have to have due process in the United States of America, for goodness sakes. Now, all of a sudden, the U.S. House of Representatives is just going to say, based on allegations, without proof, without investigations, we're just going to say that this is what's happened. I just think that's wrong. And I do have a question for Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, at the beginning of your testimony, your audio had been cut off, and you had said something about the Washington Post, and I didn't really catch what you had said. Who said this and what happened? Can you repeat that, please? You have to put on your audio again.
If I may, on page 3 of the resolution, it says, whereas on September 14th of 2020, a coalition of organizations, including Project South, and it goes on from there, made accusations, including detained immigrant women receiving unnecessary hysterectomies and a lack of informed consent for gynecological procedures. There is an AP story and I'm quoting the AP story, but a lawyer who helped file the complaint said she never spoke to any women who had hysterectomies. Priyanka Bhatt, staff attorney at the advocacy group Project South, which is the first group named in the resolution, so the lawyer for advocacy group Project South told the Washington Post that she included the hysterectomy allegations because she wanted to trigger an investigation to determine if they were true. The whistleblower complaint originated as a COVID-19 complaint about PPE and other procedures with regard to COVID-19, which we know was very tough in any facility, whether it be a prison or a detention center or a school or Congress. It originated over COVID-19. It was, this accusation, according to this, was made to trigger the investigation. The only thing that I've asked for, and the local hospital, quite honestly, has asked for, and the people in the county commission who sit on the little hospital's authority board have asked for, is to let's have the investigation. They're confident that the investigation is going to clear them because either procedures were done or they were not done. And this accusation that there have been mass sterilizations going on, it's just, if there is a complete and thorough investigation, it's going to be proven to be a flat out lie. And so I don't understand why we can't have the investigation that they themselves asked for prior to Congress taking action. I would point out, if you go a little further down that same sheet of paper, it says on September 18th, 2020, 4 women came forward saying they did not approve of the procedures they received. It doesn't even say what procedures they received. It doesn't say what procedures they received. So again, whether you are legally in this country or whether you're illegally in this country, you're a human being. And when you have a medical condition and you go to a hospital, then there's a standard of care. And that standard of care is the same. Now, if that standard of care has been violated, then there clearly are attorneys that will take the malpractice case. The idea that these ladies can't find an attorney is simply not true. They're represented by attorneys right here that are listed with these organizations in the first paragraph of page 3. I've signed on to request the investigation. Let's have the investigation. But I would tell you that when we talk about who the victim is, the Irwin County Hospital facility and the staff at the Irwin County Hospital facility, not just Dr. Amin, but all of the people, the nurses, the doctors, the administrators, everybody who works at that hospital facility has the potential to be a victim if this is found to be false. And so I'm simply suggesting that we show everybody the same amount of respect. Show the nurses that are out there putting their lives on the line at the Irwin County Hospital the respect to have the investigation before you condemn the facility and the staff of that facility for doing procedures that I think that if there is an investigation, it's going to show were medically necessary.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. And,
Thank you.
I yield back.
Thank you. And I just so there's no confusion here, this legislation, as I read it, doesn't preclude any investigation. In fact, what it does is calls on the Department of Homeland Security to make sure they comply with any investigations. So anyway, I want to point that out for the record. Mr. Raskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm in very strong support of both of these resolutions. I am really happy and encouraged that many of our colleagues across the aisle have expressed their horror, at least what has been seriously alleged by several women at the facility in Georgia. And I'm also delighted, I must say, that they are agreeing with this resolution, deploring the really terrifying propaganda and conspiracy theories that are being circulated by QAnon at this point. There is a whiff of fascism in the air in our beloved democracy today. And we are going to need everybody to try to stick together across partisan lines to stop this drift or this drive into fascism. Voltaire said, anyone who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And so I'm glad that we are drawing the line at the extremist propaganda, disinformation, and ideology that's being purveyed by QAnon. And I'm glad also that we are standing up for the rights of women not to have gynecological procedures forced upon them without their consent and without their understanding. That itself is, of course, a hallmark of authoritarian and totalitarian government in the last century and the century before that. And so I'm glad that we are coming together on a statement of values, that this is not who we are as the world's first modern democracy, as a constitutional democracy committed to the dignity and the rights of each person, the liberty and the freedom of each person. So I'm happy that we're getting a concurrence around values, and with that, I'll yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Ms. Scanlon.
Yes, I've been speaking with my colleagues who went on the Codell last weekend, and unfortunately, it is sounding as though there are very serious allegations and further investigation that needs to be done. But obviously, this goes far beyond medical malpractice cases. I mean, that's one aspect in play here, but the big issue is that we have immigrants who've been detained in our custody. These are not people who have been convicted of any crime. They are detained in U.S. custody, and the allegation is that they are being subjected to non-consensual medical treatment. So yes, absolutely right, that there may be some liability for doctors or medical personnel who participated in such. There also could be criminal liability. But the point is, these people were in U.S. custody. It was our immigration services who failed to make sure that whatever medical care they were receiving was adequate. So it absolutely has to be something that's investigated. I'm obviously very much in favor of the resolution, and I look forward to moving it to the floor.
Thank you very much. Mr. Morelli.
Good, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
All right, Ms. Shalala.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I strongly support this resolution. I
Thank you.
strongly support this resolution. It doesn't have a lot of credibility to me because I saw their inadequate treatment of young people in the detention centers, the private detention centers in my area. And in addition to that, I'm very worried about the fact that the agency itself is going to investigate this. I would have preferred, I hope it's going to be an inspector general, because there are issues here that ought to involve a look at the reimbursement and the contract system that this company has, because if it's paying according to procedures, there's all sorts of economic incentives to do the wrong thing. And this requires a thorough investigation. The allegations are horrific. And I am happy and strongly support this resolution.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matsui.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do support both resolutions. Reproductive medical procedures can take an extreme emotional toll. And I'm thinking about these women who are in custody, believing that they really didn't know what was going on. And so the suffering caused by this unwanted medical procedure without consent is unimaginable, and it should not ever happen. Now, this resolution calls on the Department of Homeland Security to take needed steps, and I think that is really important. And I associate my remarks along with Ms. Shalala's in the sense that I believe it should even be more extensive than what we laid out here. But I think we need to do this for the first step. And let me just say about the HRES 1154, it's over the last few years, we've all witnessed the alarming emergence of the QAnon movement. And they've been described by the FBI as conspiracy theory-driven domestic extremists, and it's producing some of the most dangerous and unfounded content circulating online. Just last week in the Consumer Protection Subcommittee in Energy and Commerce, we heard testimony from a young Black woman to hold the first Black woman to hold the position of student body president at American University. And she described the wretched and racist attacks that she endured after fringe groups online found out about her historic election. So while extremist speech and conspiratorial theories online may feel far away or abstract, it is important that we remember the human costs associated with these extremist groups. And if left unchecked, they will only grow. So this resolution also sends an important message. And with that, I yield back. I support both.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Lesko.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify something because Ms. Shalala had a question. She was concerned that only the Department of Homeland Security was going to be investigating. It's my understanding that it's both the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of Inspector General. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Has everybody asked questions of the witnesses? Seeing that nobody else wants to ask a question, our witnesses are dismissed. Thank you very much for your testimony. But
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. You are free to go. Are there any other members that wish to testify on HR 1153 or HR 1154? Seeing or hearing none, this closes the hearing on these measures. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion from the distinguished gentleman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant House Resolution 1153 condemning unwanted, unnecessary medical procedures on individuals without their full informed consent, a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the resolution. The rule provides that the amendment printed in the report shall be considered as adopted, and the resolution as amended shall be considered as read. The rule provides for consideration of House Resolution 1154, condemning QAnon and rejecting the conspiracy theories it promotes under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the resolution. Finally, the rule provides that the resolution shall be considered as read. I yield back.
You've heard the motion from the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Is there any amendment or discussion?
Chairman,
Yes,
this is Tom Cole, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay, Mr. Cole, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think actually Ms. Lesko is going to.
Okay, Ms. Lesko.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move that the committee add a section to the rule postponing consideration of HRES 1153 until October 9th, 2020. Mr. Chairman, all we are asking here is that we postpone consideration of this resolution until it has had adequate time for the Committee of Jurisdiction to hold a proper hearing. Again, Mr. Chairman, I think all of us would agree that if the allegations are true, then obviously it's egregious. However, in this whereas resolution, one of the whereas said, whereas these allegations indicate a failure by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, we don't even know if the allegations are true. I mean, the investigations haven't even been done yet. And so at least we should postpone it so the Committee of Jurisdiction could at least hear this and investigate it. And I yield back.
You heard the amendment from the gentlewoman. Any discussion? Hearing none, the vote is on the Lesko amendment. In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. In opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
And Mr. Chair, I call for a roll call vote.
Roll call vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings. Mrs. Torres.
No.
Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter.
No.
Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin.
No.
Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon.
No.
Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli.
No.
Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala.
No.
Ms. Shalala, no. Ms. Matsui.
No.
Ms. Matsui, no. Mr. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall.
Aye.
Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mrs. Lesko.
Aye.
Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will call the roll. I mean, report the total, I'm sorry. Total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Look, as I think the discussion showed, there's considerable concern about HRS 1153, not in terms of us all being outraged if that indeed occurred, but unease about moving ahead with a resolution before we've had an investigation that makes really serious allegations. So I think in order, I mean, I really think this is a really important issue where if we possibly can, we ought to speak with great unanimity, and I think that's possible. So I would propose for HR 1153 an open rule, allow us to have this kind of discussion on the floor. Frankly, the Rules Committee is the Rules Committee. I'm not sure Ms. Lesko's amendment wouldn't succeed on the floor because I think a lot of people, again, we all want to say the same thing about what we all agree is an horrific thing. We just want to make sure it happened. And so an open rule might allow us to have that discussion and at least make people more likely to speak together rather than this becoming some sort of partisan vote, which I don't think anybody wants. I don't think the gentlelady that proposed the resolution wants that. But let's give ourselves the opportunity to speak with one voice on what we all agree. If it occurred, it's an horrific and unacceptable situation.
You heard the amendment from the gentleman from Oklahoma. All those, any discussion? If not, the vote will occur on the Cole amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Being the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that, I would request the yeas and nays.
The ayes and nays have been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings.
No.
Mrs. Torres? No. Mr. Perlmutter?
No.
Mr. Perlmutter? No. Mr. Raskin?
No.
Mr. Raskin? No. Ms. Scanlon?
No.
Ms. Scanlon? No. Mr. Morelli?
No.
Mr. Morelli? No. Ms. Shalala?
No.
Ms. Shalala? No. Ms. Matsui?
No.
Ms. Matsui? No. Mr. Cole?
Aye.
Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Woodall?
Aye.
Mr. Woodall? Aye. Mr. Burgess? Mrs. Lesko?
Aye.
Mrs. Lesko? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman? No.
Clerk, report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments?
Mr.
Who's it?
It was Woodall.
Go, Mr. Waddle.
Woodall. I don't have an amendment. I just find myself terribly concerned. I know a lot of times we have to do messaging issues, and I know a lot of times it's in the majority's advantage to push a bill just a little too far so that vulnerable minority members can't support it. It creates wedge issues for elections. I watch Republican leadership do it, and I watch Democratic leadership do it. If we've heard a more disturbing story about actions taking place under the color of United States leadership, folks in the custody of United States personnel, I don't recall that more disturbing story. And to move forward on something that, particularly after the display we saw last night, America needs to see us standing shoulder to shoulder on these issues. And if I see my ranking member try to bend over backwards more to lead our side of the aisle to stand shoulder to shoulder with you, I can't recall when that was. 2 amendments have been offered here tonight, both defeated on a party line vote, both designed to get to yes. Not yes for the majority, but yes for the United States House of Representatives, speaking with one voice on behalf of the American people. I have been impressed by your leadership on this committee throughout these 21 months that we've been working under your leadership. And I would just implore you, in the ways that you have bent over backwards already this Congress, to try to make this institution stronger. Not the Democratic Party stronger, not the Republican Party weaker, but the work you have done to make our institution stronger. I fear that what we are doing tonight is going to make our institution weaker. And I would ask you not to make that mistake and take yes for an answer on something that America needs to hear yes from absolutely all of us.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments, gentlemen. I guess I don't read this the way he does. I mean, this is not the final. This is not to get around an investigation. This says that we expect all the agencies involved here, the departments involved, to actually comply with the investigation. We know there were allegations. That's a fact. We know that. So I just don't see it the way you do. So, but I appreciate the gentleman's comments. Are there further amendments?
Yes,
Yeah, let's go. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move that the committee add a section to the rule providing for consideration of HRES 536 under an open rule. This resolution, introduced by Mr. Green from Tennessee, strongly condemns the violent actions of Antifa and recognizes that it engages in domestic terrorism. Antifa is not only a grave threat to our country's values, but our safety and security as well. And for that reason, I urge everyone to support my amendment. So we're talking about QAnon, which quite frankly, I know hardly anything about, but we certainly know a lot about Antifa too. And so both groups are bad, and I think you should add them in.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, which it is a little frustrating because I mean, the president was asked today about why he won't condemn white supremacy, and he couldn't condemn it, so he changed the subject to Antifa. I mean, here we're talking about QAnon, which
she knows
is a conspiracy, sick conspiracy cult, and the response to that is let's talk about something else. So I hope that we just move forward with this. So the vote is on the gentlelady's amendment. All those.
No, wait, Mr. Is there an opportunity for debate or additional comments?
Go ahead. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Look, I very much support the gentlelady's amendment, and let me tell you why. Look, I agree with you about QAnon. I think I made that very apparent in my remarks. And with all due respect, we don't speak for the president, we speak for the Congress here. And to pretend that we have this problem on one end of the political spectrum and not on the other, I think is a mistake. I think the gentlelady's trying to add some balance here. Antifa, every bit as repugnant, has engaged in terrible activities. That's just a fact. That's true. Now, I'm happy to join my friends in condemning a group on the extreme, I don't even call it the right, they're just crazy. I happen to think the same thing about Antifa. I don't think they represent the left. I think they're just anarchists and crazy. So, frankly, go a lot further. I think you're going to get a strong vote anyway. Our people are going to make a strong statement about a group that you find repugnant. I would hope your group could make an equally strong statement about a group that, frankly, I think is equally repugnant to all Americans if you know anything about it. So I very strongly support the gentlelady's amendment and appreciate her offering.
Now the vote's on the gentlelady's amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Be the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chair, I call for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays have been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings.
Carl.
Mrs. Torres.
No.
Mrs. Torres. No. Mr. Perlmutter.
Hold on one second. Hold on.
Okay, everybody start muting a little bit. Get a lot of that.
What?
Mr. Perlmutter.
No.
Mr. Perlmutter. No. Mr. Raskin. Mr. Raskin.
No.
Mr. Raskin. No. Ms. Scanlon.
No.
Ms. Scanlon. No. Mr. Morelli.
No.
Mr. Morelli. No. Ms. Shalala.
No.
Ms. Shalala. No. Ms. Matsui.
No.
Ms. Matsui. No. Mr. Cole.
Very strongly aye.
Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Woodall.
Aye.
Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Burgess. Mrs. Lesko.
Aye.
Mrs. Lesko. Aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman. No.
Clerk report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. An amendment to the rule. I move that the committee add a section to the rule providing for consideration of H.R. 962, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, under an open rule. Mr. Chairman, my motion would simply allow us to consider H.R. 962 under an open rule in addition to the other measures considered under the rule. The text of H.R. 1153 states, quote, "Everyone deserves to control their own reproductive choices and make informed choices about their bodies." Should this not extend to born alive procedures? since we're considering this legislation, let's take the opportunity to ensure that women of all ages deserve protection, including the innocent babies who have no way to speak up for themselves. So for that reason, I would urge adoption of the motion.
You heard the amendment. Any discussion? Hearing none, the vote is on the Cole amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
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 Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that, I'd ask for the ayes and nays.
The yeas and nays have been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings, Mrs.
No.
Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter,
No.
Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin,
No.
Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon,
No.
Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli,
No.
Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala,
No.
Ms. Shalala, no. Ms. Matsui,
No.
Ms. Matsui, no. Mr. Cole,
Aye.
Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall,
Aye.
Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess, Mrs. Lesko,
Aye.
Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've got an amendment to the rule. I move the committee add a section to the rule providing for consideration of H.R. 8265 under an open rule. Mr. Chairman, we are here on 2 non-binding resolutions that have been designated as emergencies at the very last minute without much consultation. One of which, frankly, still has a pending investigation that we have no idea if the allegations are actually true, although we recognize that the allegations are indeed serious and merit investigation and consideration. But what I do know is true and is an emergency is the danger to small businesses and the millions that they employ. We have a bill to reopen the PPP that could pass the House immediately. It has enormous bipartisan support, and I guarantee it'd pass the Senate and be signed into law as well, because the Senate and the president have both indicated that. So since we're dealing with emergency resolutions, why don't we bring up an emergency that affects the lives and well-being and jobs of millions of Americans and give ourselves an opportunity to do something that we know has broad bipartisan support, that we know the other body would pick up and pass, and we know the president would sign. So that's my motion, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, with that basically was included in the bill that we reported out of the committee earlier today.
No, actually, Mr. Chairman, I would disagree with you. That's
actually the one that we quoted actually was more expansive. So
well, yeah, it was much more expansive. It was 2.4 trillion.
No, but I'm saying
lots of unrelated.
No,
I'm happy to have the debate with you, but don't characterize.
The PPP section is more expensive.
Now, please don't characterize my amendment as the same as your bill, because they're not.
No, our bill was actually better when it came to PPP in terms of.
No, your bill is not better because my bill can pass and yours can't, and you know that.
Yeah, I know, but your bill doesn't help our schools, doesn't help our.
Yeah, but my bill can become law. Yours won't.
Well, hopefully the negotiations that are going on between Speaker Pelosi and Mr. Mnuchin might actually get the administration to come around and actually want to do something more substantive. So,
and we agree on that. I would love to have a bipartisan bill, but the one we had today was not.
So the vote is on the Cole amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that, I request the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays are requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Torres.
No.
Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter. Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin.
No.
Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon.
No.
Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli.
No.
Mr. Morelli, no. Ms. Shalala.
No.
Ms. Shalala, no. Ms. Matsui.
No.
Ms. Matsui, no. Mr. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall.
Aye.
Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mrs. Lesko.
Aye.
Mrs. Lesko, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr., who's that?
Woodall. Sometimes we feel powerless here on the minority side. Sometimes you feel powerless on the majority side too. I just want to remind you that about 18 months ago, we sat in this committee hearing room when we had an opportunity to demand that the executive branch respond to our request to see a whistleblower's complaint. And a proposal came before the Rules Committee that was a partisan proposal. The whereases were not unifying whereases, they were divisive whereases. And our whipping organization had already whipped against it. We had a chance to speak with one voice as the legislative branch, that the executive branch is accountable to us. And we were going to lose that opportunity. In fact, we moved that across the floor here in the Rules Committee. And in your wisdom, you decided to take yes for an answer. I think you went to bat for us on the minority side. More importantly, I think you went to bat for the institution, and you persuaded the leadership to remove those whereases so that instead of speaking to the executive branch as a majority, we spoke to the executive branch as a unified House. You made the House of Representatives and indeed the Congress stronger on that day. I know we have to do what we have to do here tonight, but we are not powerless, and you have used your power in the past to prevent us from missing opportunities when others were just moving too quickly to see it. And I just want to leave you with those words of encouragement before this vote. I tell my constituency about what you did on our behalf, on the institution's behalf, every time they lose hope for whether we're moving in the right direction or the wrong direction. And I thank you for that and ask you to look at this debate we've had tonight through that very same lens. And with that, I thank you for your leadership, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Any other amendments? Hearing none, the question is now on the motion offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, the motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, on that, the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays have been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings. Mrs. Torres.
Aye.
Mrs. Torres. Aye. Mr. Perlmutter.
Aye.
Mr. Perlmutter. Aye. Mr. Askin.
Aye.
Askin. Aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon. Aye. Mr. Morelli.
Aye.
Mr. Morelli. Aye. Ms. Shalala.
Aye.
Ms. Shalala. Aye. Ms. Matsui.
Aye.
Ms. Matsui. Aye. Mr. Cole.
No.
Mr. Cole. No. Mr. Woodall.
No.
Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Burgess. Mrs. Lesko.
No.
Mrs. Lesko. No. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman. Aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, Ms. Scanlon will manage it for the minority.
And Mr. Chairman,
Again, for the majority. For the majority.
Ms. Lesko will manage for the Republicans.
Okay. And so that ends the, without objection, the Rules Committee is adjourned. I don't need to do anything with,